and breathe in. And out. And it was yet again another crazy weekend on Twitter. I don't know why I bother going on Twitter on the weekend. It is insane. But it made me think about some stuff. And that's why I do Mountain Mondays on Mondays. Also because Mountain Mondays is, nice alliteration. It wouldn't sound as good saying Mountain Tuesdays. But it made me think about generalizations and hatreds. And I've been, talking about, the amount of hate and cruelty that are on the internet and how we all sort of recognize it's not healthy, but people do it anyway. They come up with these excuses and why it's okay and why not just that it's okay, that it benefits anyone in any way. And that's sort of more the thing that confuses the heck out of me about the whole thing is why do people engage in things that are such absolute wastes of time? And it's usually because I think they're trying to fight down their own fear of something. There's this idea that there are forces in the world that are trying to take over our minds or take away our freedoms and things like that. I'm sure you've heard plenty of that on the internet, that sort of rhetoric. And the reality is that, there probably are certain forces that are interested in authoritarian ends, but the ones that are going to be successful are the ones we're not going to see coming. They're not going to be angry people with signs standing out on street corners yelling at people. I mean, they're just too easy to dismiss, those angry people. And the internet is devolving into angry people being angry at other angry people. And the less the rest of us take them seriously, the more angry they become. And the one I get frustrated with is the people that object to generalizations about the groups that they consider themselves a part of, and yet they have no problem generalizing against, groups of people that they feel are the quote unquote enemy, and I find that irritating. I find it completely hypocritical. And when people go down those lines of thought, those types of arguments, I don't feel the need to what's the word I'm looking for? To give that any time. It's just a waste of time arguing with someone who engages in that kind of doublethink. Because you're not really going to get anywhere with them. They're already exhibiting a certain amount of thinking not based in reason. And the minute you get there, you can't have a well-rounded debate, because the purpose of a debate is not necessarily to win, not when you're doing, proper organized debate. The way you win a debate, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a formal debate with, Oxford rules, but the purpose of a debate is to persuade, to convince, not be right, but to convince people. And that's very different in a way that I think a lot of people don't realize. A debate is about, if you guys have seen, they'll go around and they take what opinion you have at the beginning and you're supposed to write them on a little card. And then at the end, you put what you think about the topic on another little card and you turn that in. And the winner is the side that manages to convince the most people to change their minds. And of course, people who game the system deliberately vote the other way at the beginning, so it's easier to shift. It's the honor system, and my husband cracks up whenever anybody talks about the honor system. He's laughing right now. I'm not sure if you guys can hear him. But it is sort of true that, the Oxford rules only work if everybody abides by the Oxford rules and votes honestly in the first round. But the whole idea is to create a persuasive argument. And persuasive arguments are not formed when you alienate the people you're trying to convince. And unfortunately, too much online rhetoric does that. They try to shout people down instead of trying to appeal to their better natures. And that's because the real audience for these quote unquote debates is not actually the people who made up their minds or sort of the unaligned. It's kind of signaling to whatever tribal group is part of this, I won't say fringe and I won't say radical, but it's definitely divided. Like the latest thing that got everybody up in arms over the weekend was this Richard Dawkins thing about how he retweeted something that, I'm going to word this very carefully. It was offensive content. I don't think anybody will deny it was offensive. Some people may argue that he has a right to offend, and in broad strokes, that's true. But he retweeted this joke song. It was allegedly a Muslim man and a feminist woman, and the feminist woman was based on a real life person, and that's part of where he got into trouble. But it was all that typical stuff about feminists being shrill and not getting enough sex, and Muslims worshiping a guy who raped a 9-year-old and that kind of stuff. And then at the end, they sort of end it where they say, well, can I rape you now? And it's like, oh, silly, it's not rape when a Muslim's doing it. Offensive stuff, right? Offensive stuff by any measure. And so Richard Dawkins was disinvited from this conference. Cue internet outrage. Cue all the various groups involved fighting all the various groups involved. And the problem with the way it's being set up is that people didn't set it up the way I did it, which was, saying right off the bat what he shared was offensive. And the question to me in this whole thing is whether or not causing offense disqualifies you from these sorts of conferences. Based on the idea that these conferences are supposed to sort of stimulate, depending on what the objective of the conference is it to stimulate dialogue? Is it to stimulate thought? Because, one could argue with something like that. If it's to stimulate thought, no problem. Bring on offensive speakers. If it's to stimulate dialogue, something like that doesn't, in fact, stimulate dialogue. It shuts dialogue down. And so there's no place for that. The difficulty in the decision is this is not the first time Richard Dawkins has done something controversial on Twitter. And so it's almost like they invited Richard Dawkins because he was Richard Dawkins and then uninvited him because he acted like Richard Dawkins. And I can understand why people would go, well, that's kind of silly. You should have known what you were getting into going in. But it doesn't stay that way. It becomes outrage. And this doesn't solve anything, does it? I mean, everything I just sort of lined up for you guys right there was reasonable and based in a certain amount of awareness of the world and awareness of consequence and awareness of who the players are, from the outset. But it doesn't go there. It broadens to this fight, not just about this one instance, but the entire ideologies running in the background of this argument. And that's where I'm like, that doesn't solve anything. You're not going to prove feminism or Islam or free speech or anything like that is good or bad based on this one very specific, very anecdotal thing. But people on the internet absolutely love to generalize because it feels good and it feels safe, and they can temporarily and you know, a lot of people aren't prepared to admit this is what they're doing, but this is what you're doing when you take a sweeping generalization at an entire group. It's allowing people to vent their rage in a way that they believe is safe because they'll be protected by people who feel the same way. And that's not moral. It's not moral. It's not ethical under any system that I have read. And then I get these thinkers claiming that's moral absolutism. Well, it's not. It's common sense. And the funny thing is, as I said to one person who says, there's no such thing as moral absolutes. And I said, that in and of itself is an absolutist statement. When you say there's no of anything, or there's always or never are both absolutist statements. And it really does come down to people in these groups getting a little bit of knowledge and something that really impacted them when someone else said it, and they try it out, but because they don't understand why it was effective when they heard it, they aren't effective, and then they get upset and claim they're being shut down, and you know, we get into this crazy thing about my free speech rights are being violated. And on the internet, free speech means a very, very different thing than it does in other spheres. And again, I'm going to be very, very careful with this because I recognize that there is the concept of free speech and there is the realities of free speech. And I have to be very careful for work purposes. For work purposes, I have to treat free speech as something that means the government cannot persecute me for unpopular opinions. It doesn't mean I can't be fired for violating the brand of whatever service I work for in the media. There is always morality clauses in contracts in the media, and there are always protections employers insist on to make sure that if you become a liability for them, they can get rid of you, no questions asked. There is no what people would consider free speech protections for people working for a private company in media. If you work for a government job, different story, because free speech is undeniably something that protects people from authoritarianism, from authoritarian governments. But people on the internet treat free speech as something very, very different than that. And they will fight to the death to insist that their interpretation of freedom of speech is the correct one. And I prefer to think of it more as it's a correct one, but it's not the only correct one. The concept of free speech, if you want to be a free speech, I'll say enthusiast, some people would say radical, that's your bag. You know, if you want to be someone who goes to the mat for people's God-given right to be offensive, that's completely up to you. The thing is that if you're talking about, say, First Amendment protections in the United States, the First Amendment is a government document, which means it only applies to the government. Once you have a private contract with an employer, except in, you know, certain human rights instances, that private contract, that thing you agreed to, overrides a lot of other things. So if you sign a contract with your employer where you agree that if you say something offensive, they can fire you, well, guess what? You've agreed to it in advance. And I know I talked about this last week, the idea of consequences of unpopular speech and what's appropriate and what's not. I don't think it is, how do I put this? It's easy to say it's not fair that someone has their life ruined over an offensive statement. The reality is there is a long history of precisely that happening, that people say something and they get, run out of Dodge for something that offends. And I say this as someone who for years made a very, very offensive television show, and it was deliberately offensive because it was designed to sort of separate political correctness from actual morality and actually start questioning, how much of this is moral and how much of this is, this concept of decency that is a different paradigm. It is, this idea of indecency is tied to morality, but decency is sort of like a reflection of morality that is intended to prevent you from doing things that are amoral. They're not actually the immoral act in and of itself. It's like, well, why do we have a problem with naked women? Well, we have this idea that it somehow is involved with promiscuity, and promiscuity is connected to diseases and all these other social things. And I'm not saying you should believe that. I'm saying that's the argument for this. But, the reality is that there's nothing morally wrong with nudity at all. It's what people believe it leads to that's the problem. And that's the difference between morality and decency for me. And we end up getting into these protracted arguments that are basically slippery slope clauses. It's like, well, they want to do this. Well, unless you've actually got someone on the record saying they want to take over people's minds, that's an assumption. It could be a correct assumption for all we know, but it is an assumption. You can't go and accuse people of nefarious intents without proof. And a lot of the time, it's actually not anything they can prove. It's someone's fear. They're worried that someone is trying to fundamentally change something that they enjoy. And I understand the concern that way. I mean, I'm concerned about what's going on in video games right now. I'm surprised that an overabundance of caution is leading to some exceptionally boring products involving properties that I care about and used to like very much, and I play them right now, and they're about as interesting as a blank sheet of paper. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go and start appearing hysterical out of fear. And that's what's at the core of a lot of these really nasty internet fights. It's fear. And this may sound strange, and this may sound like, no, these people are evil and all that stuff. Guys, I believe that evil does exist in the world, but I believe that a lot of the things that are believed to be evil are actually just raging ineptitude. It's either ignorance or ineptitude. There's the actual real evil is fairly rare. It is powerful, though, which is why we just can't turn a blind eye to it. But, I do believe that actual undeniable evil does exist in the world. But a lot of the stuff that we see online, it isn't actual evil. It's just ignorance. And ignorance and evil are not the same thing. And so how do I kind of close out from this? I'm still trying to figure out what we do about the fact that the dominant forms of social discourse that we're engaging in these days, and it really doesn't matter who you are, you're sort of stuck, you're stuck dealing in these, in these spheres, even if you don't want to, right? I mean, I find Twitter an inhospitable place, but I use it because there's still benefits as well as the unpleasantness. And you have to make that choice for yourself. Now, where it becomes a problem is if these same attitudes start filtering into places that people can't avoid. And we do have an issue with our public discourse that it's become very, very hostile. And that's when I start going, this is disconcerting. You know, we can't reward our public figures. We can't reward people with power for behaving in mean-spirited, bullying, childish ways because we temporarily find it entertaining. That is going to take us in places that none of us really want to go, because when you think about it, imagine if that thing you're laughing at because it's funny and, you know, everybody loves a train wreck. Imagine if that was turned on you. Imagine if you were the target for that sort of ire. I mean, imagine if you were Megyn Kelly when Donald Trump won't let up on her. And people can say, oh, it's making her career. And there's an element that that's true, but that's because she's sticking to her guns. Fox is standing behind her. It's the way collectively Fox is handling these attacks that are benefiting her. It's not the attacks themselves. It's the attacks themselves are using certain really unfortunate elements of our society that women are rewarded and punished for attractiveness in equal measures, and there's absolutely no winning. But, you know, Donald Trump should be ashamed of himself running for leader of the country while behaving that way. It's terrible judgment. It's terrible leadership. There's nothing in his behavior towards Megyn Kelly that I think qualifies him to have access to nuclear weapons that he could use against other people. I mean, you want someone who's on an even keel and doesn't respond to provocations, and you know, you want somebody who is really calm, you know, with their finger on a nuclear button. You don't want somebody who loses their mind at every slight. But people are going, it's funny, it's entertaining. Fox should have put him in the debate because he's, you know, he's entertaining and it's good for ratings, and that's what we want to see. I wonder if people listen to themselves when they say things like that, because it's like, are you seriously putting entertainment value above the proper functioning of the most powerful country in the world? Seriously? That's pretty scary. And that's the part where this sort of foolishness starts becoming a real problem. It starts becoming something we do have to take seriously when it spills out into those public spheres and actually becomes something that people can't avoid. And, you know, I really hope that this is just an early political cycle thing, that people aren't really being serious about who they're going to vote for yet, that it's that typical, you know, early primary state dalliance with fringe candidates and everything will sort of sort itself out. But I think it's a symptom of a larger trend that we have to really be serious about. And that's why I want to talk about this stuff in broader terms without, you know, using anyone as a focal point, the discussion of ideas. And, you know, it's that, you know, what is it? Small minds attack people. I forget part of it. But the problem with everybody trying to fight an ideological war over an idiosyncratic issue like the Richard Dawkins conference tweet thing is that something like this latest Dawkins thing is a collection of things. It's a unique intersection point of a lot of things. It's not an indication of anything, what's the word I'm looking for? Anything we can really isolate about any particular movement, any particular ideology, because it's too much stuff at once. It's all the things, and it's just sort of bringing out the worst in everyone involved. And that doesn't mean that all the movements the people involved in are all bad. And it's sort of reverse logic. You can't induce the idea that because people behave badly and they are part of a group, the whole group is bad. That's collective blame, and that's precisely the thing that nobody likes when it's done to them. But people do it to each other all the time. And this is the part I don't understand about the internet, is when it's done to them, people will go collective blame, instant bad, yellow card. But they engage in it freely and don't even realize they're doing it. And then when you call them on it, which I've actually started calling people on these things because I'm tired of sort of sitting there and wondering, does this person really respect me? Or are they using me as a weapon against other people who happen to be, say, feminists or whatever, because they think they can use my words to weaken the movement I believe in? I won't be used that way. So I am calling people on it. And some people get exceptionally offended when I say things like, you say you hate feminists. Well, I'm a feminist, so that means you hate me. Instead of going, you're right, I shouldn't say that, people treat me like I just said something ridiculous and unreasonable. And they get their friends to gang up, and then I've got this whole, anti-feminist dog pile going on. But the statement is still true. If you were to remove the term, feminist, and replace that with any other sort of identifiable thing, it would sound exceptionally hateful. Feminists are crazy. Feminists are insane. Feminists are dangerous. Well, what if you said black people are dangerous? That would be racist. So, when I talk about the fact that, and I would like to think that people who talk to me a lot actually consume my content, because otherwise, why? Why are you talking to me if you don't sort of support what I do? And I know some people believe that you should take any support, any compliment out there. I'm not like that. I'm not driven by a need to be liked for the sake of being liked. I actually want to do some good with my life. And the only way you do anything productive is if you shut down activities that are unproductive. And talking to someone takes time and it takes energy, especially when you disagree. And so I want to make sure those disagreements are actually productive, as opposed to being things that are just a waste of time that leave everybody tired. There's no point in arguing with someone if you're not going to get anywhere. Arguments can be productive as long as people argue effectively. And maybe that'll be something I'll talk about in a future Mountain Monday, arguing effectively. But I just wanted to sort of respond to the craziness, which is what Mountain Monday ends up being, because weekends on social networks are insane. So we'll close off now. Breathe in.